And we're going to be continuing on, left off on page 327. And we're still in the section concerning birthdays and the abomination that is practiced and the depths of the God worship that does exist. And the birthday celebrations, I think, are probably one of the most common things that we see. I know it's there's always a birthday party going on somewhere, and the people that are doing these things, they have absolutely no clue as to where these things are coming from. But praise Yahweh. Yahweh has called us out of this world, and He's given us a teacher to show these things to us. And these things are being exposed, not only to us now, but all those who are tuning into these classes, who are reading these books, and they begin to see. We're beginning to see just the depth of and just how deep this God worship does go. We left off on page 327, and we're speaking on. Last week we were talking about the god Osiris, and Osiris. He was a vegetation god, and he was, as Pastor shows us here through this article, that Osiris was a vegetation or earth god submerged in the annual Nile floods to only emerge again, bringing forth life-giving plants and for mankind. And he's associated with Isis and Horus, the former as his wife, and the latter as their son. And you can see this pattern of the father, husband, son. You see this, constantly throughout these mystery religions, throughout the God worship that is that was practiced. And it always followed the cycle of the sun, the solstices and the equinoxes, during the times of from the spring to the summer, the time of fertility, then the time from the summer solstice to the autumn equinox, you have the time of the dying, the vegetation beginning to die off, and then continuing to die until the winter solstice, when the days start to become longer, and then you see the resurrection. You see a resurrection of this dead God begin to take place, just as the days begin to get longer, and again, then the whole cycle just continually repeats itself. And this is the general pattern that these ancient religions that they follow. And although they use different names, these gods come in different names. They all refer to the same God. But this god Osiris was a vegetation god, like I said, in the annual flood, and emerged again to bring life-giving plants for mankind. He was usually identified as the god of the afterlife and the underworld and of the dead. Osiris was considered not only to be a merciful judge of the dead in the afterlife, but also the underworld agency that granted all life. So you can see how how important this deity or this god was. Including the sprouting of vegetation and the fertile flooding of the Nile River. Now, the kings of Egypt were associated with Osiris, and as Osiris rose from the dead, they would, in union with him, inherit eternal life through a process of imitative magic, and that's what they would do. The people felt that by imitating and going through these rituals, that they would actually take on the characteristics of these gods. And they were believed to be associated with, it says, by the new kingdom, all people, not just pharaohs, were believed to be associated with Osiris at death if, now there's a condition here, if they incurred the cost of the assimilation rituals. In other words, there was a cost. There was a cost associated with it. And we don't see that cost, for eternal life, Yahweh asks one thing of us. What is that one thing that He asks of us? Keep His law. In short, it's another word for it, single word. Praise Yahweh, obedience. And that's all it is. There's no monetary cost to it. It's simple obedience. Obedience to Yahweh's law allows us to be made, allows Yahweh to make us in His righteous character, after His image and likeness. And this is what is all part of His plan to establish a ruling family that will choose to rule just as he does, to choose to be just like he is. And it also shows here that through the hope of this new life after death, Osiris began to be associated with the cycles observed in nature, and that's what we talked about, the cycle, the solar cycle, in particular vegetation and the annual flooding of the Nile through the rising of certain constellations. So we're associating certain times of the year. At the start of the new year, Osiris was widely worshipped as the Lord of the dead until the suppression of the Egyptian religion during the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire. Well, we know that the Egyptian religion didn't die out. It was just assimilated. It was combined into this one religion. And we'll see that actually here in just a little bit. But right there, that is a picture. That is the picture of Osiris there. That's kind of what he looks like. And you can kind of see the pale green skin. It's almost like what you would picture a corpse to actually look like, to have that yuck pale color. But continuing on here on page 327, let me see here. Go back over here to page 326 here. It says, Pastor shows here, he says, digressing here at this point, I must inform you that the people of ancient Egypt worshipped many different gods and goddesses. These abominations were at first worshipped only locally, but as Egypt became consolidated into one empire, the gods of the more influential cities acquired a national rather than mere local status. So as the empire grew, so did the status of some of these gods. Now, the gods whose cults were transferred to a new location occasionally superseded the native god. In other words, they took his place. But Pastor shows here, he says on page 327, because the Egyptians exhibited a willingness to accept new gods into their worship, they were also willing to merge the most influential among them. And this is, if you remember, that's exactly what Constantine did. Remember when Constantine, with the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, he merged two gods together, right? Remember what the names of the gods were? Right, there's Jesus and Krishna. And eventually that became to be known as Jesus Christ. So, but you see, it's the same pattern. You know, that pattern of merging these gods together, you know, came from ancient Egypt, and it continued on even with the days of Constantine. And this is how, again, the world gets their Savior, although they don't know that. They don't realize that yet, but they will. It says, many of these gods were joined to each other, and their ritual was combined in order to serve the both of them, and that's what we see. You know, one of the things that appealed to the people, appealed to the masses about these ancient religions was that these religions would always change to meet the needs of the people. You know, when they would combine these gods, they would take the people were reluctant to give up the practices. The people were reluctant to give up the practices concerning, you know, the practices and the worship of these other gods. So what they would do is they would actually combine those traditions together, and that's why you see so many different traditions from the East, and then from all over the world. When you see things concerning like Christmas and Easter and New Year's and things like that. But not only this, the hidden gods which were associated with these influential gods were also merged along with them. So not only was the visible God, but there was also a hidden God that they kind of like, I think as it is put in a couple of pages here, the spirit of the visible God, or the genius of the visible God. And if you remember when we're discussing the celebration of birthdays, remember what took place with the birth of a male or a female child. There was a protective deity that was placed, and it was believed that there was a protective deity that was set to watch over that child. If it was a male, it was called a what? A genius. And if it was a female, it was called a what? Juno. Praise Yahweh. So, and that even extended to the gods themselves here. And so we see that here. But not only in this, the hidden gods which were associated with the influential gods were also merged. And then we see here, we read about Osiris from Collier's Encyclopedia, and it shows here the green, sometimes black color of his skin reflects the concept of Osiris as the vegetation or earth god submerged in the annual Nile flood and then emerging again to bring forth life-giving plants for mankind. And it shows here, he says, another myth tells that Osiris simply drowned in the Nile. In both, however, he descended into the water and then came forth with life-giving moisture and fertilizing power to sustain human beings. And then we see here that we read here, it says that the Nile itself, that this god actually emerged from the Nile itself. Well, the Nile was actually called, and it was deified, that the river Nile was actually deified, and had another name. It was known as, it had a god's name, and the name of the god was Happy, H-A-P-I. It says the river Nile was deified under the form of its ancient name, Happy. Happy dwelt in a grotto on an island here, and it says, and he had a consort, he had a wife there, Nicobet. Let me see here. He was called the great Lord of provisions, the Lord of fishes, the Father of the gods, the creator of things which exist, a verifier. By his worshippers he was exalted above Ra. He was most consistently spoken of as a giver of fertility to the earth and a bringer of food, but like most gods, he was called also the establisher of right or truth. And then it shows here that his symbols were water and plants. But it says, as the water and vegetation god, Happy was identified with Osiris, Happy being the Nile and Osiris the fertilizing virtues of the river. He was also identified with Nun, the primeval water mass, and as a creator god, he was also from time to time identified with Ra, and this other one here that we're going to get into called Ptah. And offerings were made to him for his aid, and he was blessed during the periods of undulations or these floods. We have reference to several temples which were dedicated to Happy, and one of them was located at Memphis, and in Memphis there in Egypt. Now, continuing here, it says in Funkenwagel's Standard Dictionary, it talks about Happy as the Nile god. And it said in the Egyptian religion and mythology, one of the four sons of Horus who dwelt in Amenti, was a mummiform spirit with the head of a dog, and who protected the embalmed lungs of the dead preserved. So this is talking about actually funeral rites that took place in Egypt, and some of these gods had different jobs to do. To protect different organs, and this one was to protect the lungs of the dead. Then the god of the Nile shows here an obese, bearded man with the breasts of a woman. The Greek Nilus, both great and the great stomach and the breasts are symbols of fertility of this water god. And it shows here that Happy was worshipped especially at the annual floods. And the mysterious resurrection of the life-bringer caused him to be identified even in early times with Osiris. And what you kind of see here is that Osiris, Osiris rose out of the Nile. So Osiris actually came out of this other god, Happy. So you can kind of see there's a relationship here between these two. Therefore, Happy was the hidden god which was worshipped alongside the god Osiris, Pastor writes here. Happy, as the hidden god, was designated the father of the gods, the creator of things which exist, the life giver, the god of fertility and resurrection. So, and now we're going to see here about this other god by the name of Ptah, and I think I'm actually pronouncing it right. Of Ptah, this Egyptian god, the god of Memphis. And Memphis was, if you remember, Memphis was the ancient capital of Egypt. Of comparatively late origin, it shows here that this Ptah was represented in human form, and it shows here how he's represented. I do have a. That one's kind of hard to see because of the white on white, but you can kind of see here how this Egyptian god here is portrayed. He's always represented as in human form, and he was regarded as a technician or artisan who had created man. Notice what he did. He had created man and the world by his dexterous skill. The theologians of Memphis, in their rivalry with the city of Hermopolis and Hermopolis' god Ammon, developed a lofty concept of Ptah as the creator whose heart or mind and tongue utterance produced the entire creation. So this here is actually a representative here of the father of the gods, the creator of all. And it says, and Pastor, he writes down here, he says, remember this fact here. He says, Ptah was joined to Osiris. And then, let me see here. There was something else here, I think. Wikipedia had a little bit more here. It showed here that Ptah was a craftsman and was a god of craftsmen and architects. In the triad of Memphis, he is the spouse, and he talks about the spouse, who his spouse was, who his father was, and he's also regarded as the father of a particular sage here. But notice here it talks about the triad, the Trinity, Trinity, three. So you can kind of see how that plays into this. And he's listed as the creator God, and he is considered the one who he existed before all things, and by his willfulness thought the world. He thought the world. It was first conceived by thought and realized by word, and he conceives the world by the thought of us, and his heart gives the life through the magic of his word. And that's what their thoughts are on him. So, but Pastor says, I ask again that you remember that you have read about the mystery religion of Memphis, Egypt, but the hidden god of this Egyptian cult had not yet been revealed. Now, Memphis here was the capital of ancient Egypt, about 14 miles south of Cairo, and its great god, the main deity that was there, was this Ptah, in whose temple was kept the Apis bull. And I know some of this is kind of dry, but it's very important that we kind of understand it, because you'll see how all this will tie in here in just a minute. Pastor's walking us through. Remember what he's doing. He's taking us step by step, walking us through and just showing us how deep the tentacles of this God worship goes and where these things come from. So, and its great god was Ptah, in whose temple was kept the Apis bull. In its sacred name, the house of the genius of Ptah, in which the Greeks rendered Aegyptus, giving us our name Egypt. And then Pastor, I love it because Pastor, he just summarizes it down here at the bottom. He says, read this fact for yourself. The sacred name of Memphis, it means the house of the genius of Ptah. And if you remember what that genius was, remember how that ties back into the birth of children. And to the birth of boys and girls. The genius was a spirit or a god. It was a guardian deity or guardian spirit. According to the ancient Roman belief, the guardian spirit assigned to a person at birth. And this is the whole reason for the birthday celebrations, the offering of the cakes and the candles and the gifts. They were all meant to appease this God, to allow this person to live safely for another year. This was the whole purpose behind it, and Pastor, he clarifies it a little bit further as we continue on here. But Pastor says, remember, Ptah was joined to Osiris, and remember what you just read, in Ptah's temple was kept the Apis bull. And the word Apis, the very definition of the word Apis, means hidden. So we're beginning to see who this hidden deity is. It means the hidden. And Pastor shows here from Webster's Deluxe Unabridged Dictionary, you can see Apis means the hidden, this hidden bull. And then we see some more information here about happy, or Apis, and it shows here from Funk and Wagnall's Standard Dictionary of Folklore and Mythology. It shows that this is literally the hidden in the ancient Egyptian religion, the sacred bull of Memphis, the symbol and incarnation of Ptah Osiris. This bull was the offering of a virgin cow who had been impregnated by a lightning or a moonbeam. So it's almost like an immaculate conception type of thing. In death, it was known in Ptolemaic times as the powerful god Scrapes. Yeah, almost sounds like scabies, but Scrapes. Osiris Apis. Okay, so now Pastor, he clarifies here for us. So Happy was the genius of Ptah and of Osiris, the hidden god which was worshipped. And this hidden god, Happy, Apis, was represented as the sacred bull of Memphis, was the symbol and incarnation of the gods of Ptah and Osiris. So now this hidden god has been revealed here. This Apis bull is the symbol and incarnation of these gods, and this is the hidden god that was worshipped. So this is kind of what, at least in their art form, that this bull looks like. And you can see the sun disk. You see the sun disk that's right there between the horns. Okay, and that ties into sun worship. That ties into the various names and the various forms of sun worship. As Pastor gets into here in just a little bit. But you can see that, and you kind of keep that in mind. That's very common. When you see this Apis bull, and you see that vision of that sun disk. Pastor says here, he says, digressing here, I ask that you please notice how each of these gods traces and unifies into the same God. So, they all trace back to one. And Pastor shows here they all trace back to Nimrod. They all trace back to this, to Nimrod, this system, who was the first to be opposed to Yahweh. Yes, this whole system, this Nimrod system is bitterly opposed to Yahweh. And these hidden gods were known by many names, but these gods combined into one hidden god, Nimrod, even the name of Egypt, the house of the genius of Happy of Ptah. So even the name of Egypt, that's what it means. So when Yahweh brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, the first of the 10 commandments is given to them was, you must have no hinder gods. Okay, that's what he said, the first of the 10. Remember, the 10 commandments are an outline of the entire 613 laws. So that first one, to remind the people, is that you are to have no hinder gods, period. End of story, no ifs, ands, or buts. However, this one commandment is ignored by the Jews and Christians alike. In fact, at every birthday celebration in which the Jews and Christians participate, and it's not limited to just Jews and Christians, it's anyone, regardless of their religion, anybody who celebrates these birthdays, they are actually honoring and worshiping these gods, and they don't realize it. It's the hidden gods that they're worshiping. It says, Yahweh is not worshipped among these religions today, but the hinder gods of Egypt are worshipped and glorified in this whole deceived world. Yes, these gods are worshipped by every person in every religion except the house of Yahweh. And that kind of brings to mind, you remember in Acts chapter 17, Shaul, when Shaul was speaking at the Areopagus, Areopagus. He says here in Acts 17:22, then Shaul stood in the middle of Mars Hill and said, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way that you are given to religious observances and the worship of your gods. And he was seeing that. He saw that, the Apostle Shaul, he saw that at that time. For as I passed by, carefully observing your objects of worship, I also came upon an altar with the inscription, to the unknown God. Well, even the gods, the unknown gods were being worshipped, and there was an altar to this unknown God that then That then is what you ignorantly worship, having no understanding. And that's the same way the world is today. The world today, they have no understanding of what they worship. Just as Shaul did at that time, Pastor is doing the exact same thing in these last days. He says, "This I announce to you." He says, "Yahweh who made the world and all things in it, being creator of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands." Well, we just read how this one God was worshipped as the creator of heaven and earth, was the creator of all things. And Shaul was pointing out here and showing them, no, it wasn't this God that did this, it was Yahweh. And Yahweh is not a God, but Yahweh, being the creator of heaven and earth, he does not dwell in a temple made with hands, nor is he served by human hands, as though he lacked anything, since it is he himself who gives to everyone life and breath and all things. You think about it. The world, they think that their God has given them these things. They think that they have actually provided these things for themselves. And they're ignorant. They don't realize that all of the blessings that they do have in some form, in some way or another, come from Yahweh. Everything that we have, the breath of life, our very life isn't ours. Who gave us that life? Yahweh gave us that life. Who gives us the breath that we draw every day? Yahweh gives it to us. What about the food? What about the water? Yahweh provides everything for us. Even the very life that we have is not ours. And so, we owe it to Yahweh to serve him in all that we do. And he has made from one blood all nations of men who dwell on the face of the earth, and he has determined the times before the appointed for them and the boundaries of their habitation, that they might seek Yahweh in the hope that they might feel their way toward him and find him, though he is not far from each and every one of us. For in him we live, we move, and we have our being. And also some of your own poets have said, for we are his offspring. The gods are powerless. Remember there in Kings the 450 prophets of Baal or Baal, and the one prophet of Yahweh. Remember the prayers that went out to, the prayers that went up to the gods. They were nothing had taken place. It doesn't matter what they did. And you remember that. The question was asked. Well, where are your gods? Are they on vacation? Are they sleeping? Maybe they're taking a nap. Maybe you need to wake them up. Maybe you need to yell louder or scream louder. Maybe you need to do some other things to get them to pay attention to you. And there was nothing there. The gods are powerless, and that's what we have to remember. Therefore, in verse 29 there it says, "Therefore, since we are the offspring of Yahweh, we must not think that the holiness of Yahweh is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's hand and design and skill." In the past, Yahweh winked at such ignorance. He winked at our ignorance. He overlooked it. When we were in the world, he overlooked the ignorance that we had. Because all of us who were called out of this world fell into the category of worshiping these gods. And Yahweh overlooked that, and he called us into his house and says, this is the way, walk in it. And he opened our eyes, he opened our minds to this understanding, and it was up to us. Remember, we talked a couple of weeks ago about the alarm clock that was set in the jeans. Maybe it was in a law class. Might have been the law class. I get the classes sometimes kind of confused, but I think it might have been law class a couple of weeks ago. Pastor was talking about the jeans and the alarm clock in the jeans. The Yahweh had set a certain time in these jeans to go off when our understanding would be open and we could actually see and understand what Revelation 12:9 shows, and that Satan has the whole world deceived. So, and then it was up to us. He gives us that little bit of knowledge, that little bit of understanding. And what do we do with it? Do we water it? Do we pursue it? Do we thirst after it? Do we go after it? Do we try to cultivate that? Or do we push it aside and do we go after the way of the gods? That's what Yahweh wants to see. He wants to see if we want his way above everything. And this is why we've been created with the carnal mind. Because the carnal mind, remember, is bitterly opposed to the laws of Yahweh. And he has to know, and in this way we're tested to see whether we want to reverence Yahweh or not. And And it doesn't matter. I've heard people, try to, they want to try to get away from situations. They want to kind of hide from a situation and really not deal with it. But men, we have to learn how to deal with the situations in our lives. We can't run from them. We have to learn how to deal with them. We have to have our minds set that we're just not going to participate in these things, even if it's set before us. It's just like that nasty old pepperoni pizza that we used to, probably most of us used to love to eat. We couldn't get enough of it, but when we realized the danger and the damage that comes from pork, there could be 20,000 pepperoni pizzas set before us, and we're not going to touch it because we have that set in our mind of what we're going to do. And that goes with any other sin, with any other bad habit, with any other sin that we're trying to overcome. We have to make the conscious choice that we're just not going to partake in it. We're not going to do it. That's what Yahweh wants to see, that we're going to set our mind to it, we're going to set our mind to following His laws and pushing forward, working our way into this kingdom and not looking back as Lot's wife did, and desiring the ways of the gods and turning back into that God worship. As it said, we have to put our hand to the plow and move forward, and not look back. Because the work that we're doing, is, and it's the magnitude and the benefit that's going to come from what we're doing and what we're learning. I don't even know if we can fully, truly comprehend the blessings that are going to come from this and how much benefit is going to come from it. But we have to make that understand. We have to make that effort. For Yahweh has appointed a day in which He will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom He has ordained and has given evidence to everyone by raising Him from the dead. And then when they heard the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed, but others said, "We want to hear you again about this." And so this is the same thing that's going out to the world. The world is getting these sermons. The world is getting these classes. And yes, some are going to scoff. When Pastor brought out the true cause of global warming, people scoffed, didn't they? People scoffed. They looked at him, they ridiculed him, they talked about him, and they said he was crazy. And they laughed. Well, what's science now proving? Oh, science is actually proving what Pastor told us that many, many years ago. So they're not scoffing now, and it's more and more. The more the closer we get to the coming of the kingdom, the closer we get to the kingdom being here, the more this realization is going to come about. We believed without seeing, and now we're beginning to see. We're beginning to see now what we already believed. We're seeing as it comes to pass. And if that is not a strength, if that doesn't strengthen our faith, if that doesn't strengthen our trust, and I don't know what will. But it does. Remember what Pastor has always told us, fulfilled prophecy proves all things. And we're seeing these things come to pass right before our very eyes. All we have to do is look. But Osiris here on the bottom of page 331, Osiris was identified at Memphis with Ptah, and the gods which were identified or associated with Ptah, such as the local sacred bull Apis or Hap. This union led to the name Osiris Apis, known as Serapis. Now, Serapis was introduced into the Egyptian pantheon by Ptolemy I, the Macedonian general who ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great died. And so, this is the time period between the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire. Remember the third and the fourth world ruling kingdom that Daniel saw. So this is right about that time period. They did this with the intention of establishing a god in whose worship the Greeks could join in a common shrine. So you can see here what was done was the exact same thing that Constantine did. He merged these gods together to get a common god who all could join in at a common shrine and worship. The temple of Osiris Apis was rebuilt in Alexandria and is known as the Serapeum, and a great image of the god was set up. The Egyptians were told that the god was a combining of Osiris and Apis of Memphis, and they discerned him in him Osiris, Apis, Serapis. Serapis assumed the titles of Osiris as the Nile god, Happy, and the god of the underworld, and the judge of the dead. And it shows here that this worship, or this, they refer to it as a cult here and there, but it says this cult spread to Greece, and it was found its way to Rome and its provinces. Let me see here. Where do we want to go? Let me see here. It says Osiris united with Apis or Happy under the name Serapis, and attained international recognition during the Greco-Roman period, as the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible shows us. And so we can see here that this god was united with Apis under the name Serapis. And so, I mean, Pastor, he just summarized what the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible there shows us. And he says, but this happy, the sacred bull known as Apis. The sacred bull is known as Apis, was worshipped in Memphis by the Egyptians from the earliest historical time as a general god of fertility. As most of the gods, remember, they center around the fertility rituals. And they have, as a center of their worship, fertility rites. It says, although he was primarily a manifestation of the god Ptah, his fertility function led to him being closely associated with Osiris in the Greco-Roman times, and to his being regarded as the reincarnation of that god under the name Osiris, Apis, or Serapis. And then it shows, again, this representative bull, which we saw, again, we saw that representative bull there. You can kind of see that on the page. But this here, again, is that representative bull. And the following illustration from Egyptian mythology shows that this Apis bull had a sun disk between his horns. And you can kind of see that. You see that in the drawing there. But again, you see that right here, right there as well, that same sun disk. Now, from the book Two Babylons, we have already proven that this symbolism for a bull is a prince, ruler, or king. So this bull is a representative, or it means it's a symbolism for a prince, ruler, or king. Therefore, this Apis, Happy bull with the sun disk is the symbolism that the hidden God is the ruler of sun worship. So you can see it all ties in with, again, with sun worship. And there are many different forms of sun worship. Mithricism was one of those. And if you remember, that's what Constantine was. Constantine was a sun worshiper. He was a Mithra worshiper. And then we see that this Happy to be the sky father, who was known in the Roman Empire as Zeus, the Lord of heaven. So you can kind of see, I know this gets kind of, it can get kind of maybe a little confusing and a little drawn out, but you can see how Pastor, again, is tying all these things together. The Lord of heaven. So another important example of the solarization of Zeus Jupiter is seen in the cult of Serapis. Serapis is a curious example of an artificially produced god. Did you notice that? He's an artificially produced god, just like Zeus and Krishna. That combination was an artificially produced god. Remember, that was done. That Zeus and Krishna came together as a matter of a democratic vote, so to speak. I don't remember what the margin was, but the margin was very, very narrow, that God was merged, that those two gods were actually combined into one. And that wasn't something that was new to the Roman Empire. That was something that had actually taken place, centuries before. So it was the same practice. It was just passed on as time went. Now, Ptolemy the First was seeking a new religious concept to go with his own power, created out of this figure of Serapis and imported from Sinope on the Euxine, a colossal statue, and it may have represented the local sun god or sky god. But Notice here that he was seeking a new religious concept to go with his own power. What did Constantine do? Constantine did the exact same thing. So Constantine was just following the example of what had been done before. It says Serapis was represented with a bearded serenity of Zeus and honored as Zeus Serapis. He acquired other characteristics, and in some connection to Zeus, he was a god of healing like Osiris or Hades, a god of the dead. Now, this across the page over here, it says that the Zeus Serapis and was looked on as a kindly, gentle God who sets souls free from becoming and does not punish them. Well, what does the world Jesus do? What does the world Savior Jesus do? They're looked upon as a kindly, he sets souls free, free to do whatever they want to do, and they don't get punished because, he did it all for them. See the parallels here between what was taking here and this, and what took place in 325 CE. Notice this here. It says the cult, in fact, survived to the very end of the 4th century. The 4th century. Anybody know what time period the 4th century covers? How about 300 to 399 CE? So what took place in 325 CE? Well, that was the Council of Nicaea, headed by Constantine. Remember what took place around 303? With the Emperor Diocletian? Remember what he did? Praise Yahweh. Diocletian brought out the most severe persecution against the believers, against our brothers and sisters, against the house of Yahweh, and compelled all who were professed to be members, deacons, elders, deaconesses, it didn't matter. It didn't matter who they were. Compelled them to worship the gods, and if they refused, then they were killed in the most horrific ways. And this was the 10th and most severe persecution. And Pastor talks about this in the book, The Lost Faith of the Apostles and Prophets. And he covers it in detail about the 10 persecutions. And this Diocletian was the worst. He was the worst and most severe, and it was at the end of his reign. It was the end of Diocletian's reign when the house of Yahweh was wiped out and completely dead as an established organized religion. It was done. It was wiped off the face of the earth. For almost 1900 years, it was wiped off the face of the earth, until the house of Yahweh was reestablished in the last days by the 2 witnesses. Praise Yahweh. So we see here, and so it says the cult survived to the very end of the 4th century. Well, what had taken place is it would actually merge into Christianity. It merged together, and it actually became Christianity. So this cult the outward worship of this was just incorporated into the common Christian the common Christian worship. So, and it shows here, the phrase shows the persistent power of the Sky Father and the manifestation of Serapis here. It says the worship of Serapis, or Serapis, was worshipped by the Greeks and then the Romans, who tried to imitate as much as possible the traditions and the religions of the Nile land. They imitated them, they copied them, they incorporated them into their own. And it shows here, it says that this god was worshipped throughout the Roman Empire, including what is now known as England or Great Britain. Okay, so why are we all of a sudden now going here? Well, we're going to see. And it's very important as to why. And it shows here in the mythology of all races, here, and this is from 1964, some 51 years ago it looks like, but it shows here, it says, despite all this, the Egyptians never propagated their own religion abroad by missionaries. After the time of Alexander, the Greeks, who had always been somewhat attracted by the mysterious worship of the Nile land, they began to imitate some of its cults in their entirety, even outside of Egypt itself. In the Roman period, these cults spread to Italy, and thence through the whole Roman Empire as far as Brittany, they're talking about Britain. And remember how these things spread. It spread through the military because the Roman army went out to all of these areas, and these traditions and these things were taken with them. And this is also the things that they did. They brought things back as well. It says, but as we have already seen, this propagation of the Egyptian religion was almost exclusively restricted to the deities of the Osirian cycle, the most popular of the Egyptian divinities, to the Greco-Egyptian Serapis. And it says the architecture and the hieroglyphs of the temples, the obelisks and the sphinxes before the shrines, the strange linen vestments of the priests with their shaven heads and faces, the endless and obscure ritual and the animal forms in which some of the idols and some other idols everywhere filled the classical world with peculiar awe and wonderful and wonderful mysteries were believed to be hidden. Remember, Babylon Mystery the Great, the mystery religions. And they were worshiping these hidden gods too. But these wonderful mysteries were believed to be hidden under these incomprehensibilities. You know, it was just too much for the common person to understand. They had to be initiated. And they had to be initiated into these rites. They had to be initiated in a certain way to be given this secret, this secret knowledge. And if I remember that term right, I believe that term was called a Gnos. It had to do with the Gnostics. But it shows here, it says, let me see here. It mattered not that some of the freethinkers always scoffed at the animal worship and other strange features of this barbarous cult. The proselytes only clung to its mysteries with greater zeal, and the Isaac religion proved a formidable competitor of rising Christianity. Well, it really wasn't a competitor. Like I said, these things were actually merged into it. But the Latin language was used in Old England, where it was under the rule of Rome. And the Apis, again, pastor's reminding us, happy, was one of the gods which was worshipped in England. The word hap does trace back to its Old English, and as does the Latin apis, and both of these were pronounced happy. The worship of Hap was existent in York, which is now Great Britain, and among those who were the originators of the English language. Even the English-speaking people worshipped Hap, even calling him Zeus. So, when one wishes someone a happy birthday, he is actually wishing the hidden God upon them. Okay, and this is why Pastor went through all of this, so we can understand why this word hap has this connotation that it does. And it shows here, and again, you know, when someone wishes someone a happy birthday, is actually wishing the hidden God upon them. Yes, they are wishing this person to be blessed by none other than Zeus, the Sky Father or the Lord of Heaven. Collier's Encyclopedia gives us this information. It says, finally, purely animal cults of the Apis and these bulls, especially that of the Apis bull, who was considered to be the soul of the god of Ptah, flourished until Christianity superseded Egyptian paganism. But Christianity didn't supersede Egyptian paganism. It incorporated it, brought it in. Okay? It never died out. It didn't die out. It was just absorbed. Those traditions were brought in. And as we have already been proven, the soul of the god Ptah was the genius of the hidden god that was worshipped, the sun god, worshipped from antiquity. And go back and remember what that genius represented. That protective god over that individual. It says, showing honor to the god demons, luck, and fate. The word happy was brought into the Roman Empire and its provinces, which included the Roman province of England. The word happy was then and is now used to honor the pagan god Hap, happy, Apis. However, the word happy is not the only word used today in the English language to honor the pagan gods and goddesses. Reading from Collier's Encyclopedia, volume 10, page 210, we find first that fortune-telling and divination were means of obtaining secret knowledge for the future. However, we also find in this source reference that the word divine originated from the pagan art of divination. So fortune-telling and divination here, we're going to see from Encyclopedia. It shows here, it says, although fortune-telling today refers mainly to predictions of an individual's own future, it belongs to the ancient practice of divination which characterizes all primitive religions. Divination included the quest for knowledge of secrets, past, present, and future, affecting not only the individual but also the state. Okay, so not just individual. These fortune tellers, these prognosticators, these people that the state actually employed people to perform this service, and so these things were actually done on behalf of the state. Should we go to war? Shouldn't we go to war? Should we have a tax? Not have a tax? Should we do this, that, whatever? And it also shows here that there were. Let me see here. It doesn't say it here, but it also. But these people that were employed in doing this were also, bought with a price, to delay readings and maybe interpret readings a certain way so that certain political things could go a certain way. But that's also what took place here. It says, as the word indicates, divination implies the human mind may obtain knowledge from a supernatural means of a particular form of communication. The practice of ancient diviners and certain modern fortune tellers of experiencing or feigning a trance experience in which they repeat purportedly divine messages reflects the primitive and ancient frenzy of the medicine men and of the priestesses of the Greek. So, some of the things that they would look at, this divination, some of the things that they would be looking at. One of the things they would look at were omens, and omens included natural phenomenon like an eclipse. It shows here like free birth of animals and humans, birth defects. They would look at those. They would look at the behavior of a sacrificial lamb on its way to the slaughter. They would look at these things and try to foretell what was going to take place based on these occurrences. A lot of times they would sacrifice an animal and then remove its entrails and drop the entrails down, or kind of put their finger and kind of go through the entrails and say, well, this is telling me this, that, and the other. It's, but that is what they would do. Another form of divination they would use is called augury. And that's, augury is normally considered to be specifically referred to a divination by, get this, studying the flight pattern of birds. So how a bird is flying, is it flying this way or that way? Is it taking this path or that path? Or they're looking up, man, there's not too many birds out. Man, it's quiet out here. How come the birds aren't singing? They would use things like this to try to tell the future. They would other forms. They would observe thunder and lightning. They would look at and the way they looked at that would be that whenever an augur, and that's who the person employed, that's what he was called. Whenever an augur reported that Jupiter had sent down thunder and lightning, that no gathering of the Roman population could be held. So thunder and lightning, nope, can't gather. Not that there was a storm just moving through, but they would look at that as a sign from the gods that they couldn't have a gathering. Here's another one here, and it was generally used on the military expeditions. They would interpret the eating patterns of chickens, and they would have chickens cooped up, and they would take and put feed out, and if the animal wouldn't come out, if the chicken wouldn't come out of the coop to go eat, then they wouldn't attack. But if the chicken would actually go out and start eating, then they would do something else. But you can kind of see some of the foolishness involved with this. They would be taken from animals that walked on 4 feet, although they're not part. It says here, they took the form of like a fox or a wolf or a horse or a dog who crossed a person's path, or was found in an unusual location. Meanings could be interpreted by an appointed augur as some form of the will of the gods. I'll get this, sneezing. If somebody sneezed, that could be taken as a sign. Stumbling, and other slightly abnormal events could be taken as a sign from the gods to be interpreted. It ties down. It all ties into, it's just superstition. But those are just some of the things that they would use, that they would do. Pastor, he shows her, he says, do not think for one moment that Yahweh himself is divine. Okay? He is not divine, nor that Yahshua Messiah is divine. This is an abomination, as you can ascertain for yourself. The Romans appointed official state fortune tellers who dabbled in divination and who worshipped Fortuna, who they believed to be the goddess of fortune. We also find that this goddess could give or take away something from someone capriciously, that is, with a sudden change of mind on a whim, or disperse joy or sorrow on impulse, just a sudden inclination without any type of conscious thought. Just whatever would strike her. Whatever struck her at the time. And this is what is described down here in this article down here. And it shows here that in Rome there were 26 temples erected to the honor of Fortuna. The first of them built by Servius Tullius. Fortuna was symbolized as controlling 2 rudders, one for guiding the ship of prosperity and the other one for misfortune. At a later period, she wore a bandage over her eyes, held a scepter in her hand, and sat or stood on a wheel or globe. Another symbol was a cornucopia. Anybody know what a cornucopia is? What's a cornucopia? Yeah. You ever see these horns, this cone-looking thing sitting on somebody's Thanksgiving table filled with fruit? That's what that is. And that's who's represented when that is there. It's this god of Fortuna, this goddess. Fortuna was believed to work without law. She worked without law. She was a lawless one. She worked without law. Capriciously, she gave or took away as she pleased, or dispensed joy or sorrow on impulse. In other words, she just did whatever she wanted to. No rhyme or reason to it. She just did it. Why? Because she could, and because that's what she wanted to do. But Collier's Encyclopedia goes on to show that in no uncertain terms that the goddess who acted capriciously or impulsively here was the goddess of chance or luck, and that's where some of these other things come from. So what we're going to have to do is we'll go ahead and we'll pick up here on the top of page 338 the next time we have class. So with that, men, may Yahweh be with you and bless you. And we'll be on the top of page 338. So